the moment I knew my mother had destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me. I was standing in an empty apartment, holding a letter that James had left behind. 3 years of love, of building something real with someone who genuinely cared about me. Gone. And the woman responsible was not some jealous ex or cruel stranger. It was my own mother. The person who was supposed to protect me, support me, want happiness for me. She had methodically, deliberately, and without an ounce of remorse, dismantled my relationship from the inside out. And I had been too blind to see it until everything was already in ruins. My name is Megan, and I need to tell you this story because for years I blamed myself. I blamed James. I blamed circumstance and timing and everything except the person who actually orchestrated the destruction. This is the story of how my mother sabotaged my relationship, how I discovered the depth of her betrayal, and how I finally found the strength to demand justice from the one person society tells us we should always forgive. To understand what happened, you need to know about my mother. Sandra Collins has always been a complicated woman, but I spent most of my life making excuses for her complexity, instead of recognizing it for what it really was. She divorced my father when I was 12, and the bitterness of that split became the defining feature of her personality. My father had left her for a younger woman, a cliché that embarrassed her in front of her friends and family, and she never recovered from the humiliation. She became convinced that all men were essentially untrustworthy, that romantic love was a manipulation tactic, and that any woman who believed otherwise was a fool waiting to be abandoned. She raised me with this worldview as constant background noise. Every romantic comedy we watched together came with commentary about how unrealistic it was. Every time I mentioned a boy I liked in school, she would remind me of my father's betrayal. When I had my first boyfriend at 16, she interrogated him so harshly that he broke up with me within a month. I thought she was just being protective. I thought she was trying to save me from her own pain. I did not realize until much later that she was not protecting me. She was controlling me. When I met James at a friend's wedding 4 years ago, something inside me finally felt permission to hope. He was kind in a way that felt genuine rather than performative. He remembered small details about things I mentioned in passing. He asked questions about my life and actually listened to the answers. He was not intimidated by my career in nursing or threatened by my independence. He made me laugh, and more importantly, he made me feel safe. Our relationship developed slowly, which, in retrospect, was probably why my mother did not immediately perceive it as a threat. We were friends first, then dating casually, then gradually becoming more serious over the course of a year. By the time my mother realized that James was not just another temporary boyfriend, but someone I was falling deeply in love with, we were already talking about moving in together. That was when everything started to change. The first sign should have been obvious, but I was too close to see it. My mother had always been needy, calling me multiple times a day to discuss nothing in particular, expecting me to spend most of my weekends with her, becoming sulky when I made plans that did not include her. When James entered the picture seriously, her neediness intensified. The phone calls became more frequent and more demanding. She developed mysterious ailments that required my attention whenever James and I had planned something special. She started making comments about how little she saw me anymore, how lonely she was, how I was all she had. I felt guilty, of course. That was the point. My mother had spent 28 years programming me to feel responsible for her emotional state, and the programming was effective. I started canceling plans with James to tend to her supposed emergencies. I started apologizing for spending time with my boyfriend, as if I were doing something wrong. I started feeling torn between two people who both wanted my attention, not realizing that only one of them was using guilt as a weapon. James was patient. He understood that my relationship with my mother was complicated, that she was lonely and struggled after the divorce, that I felt obligated to care for her. He never gave me ultimatums or expressed resentment about the time I spent with her. He simply loved me and waited for me to find balance on my own terms. I did not know then that my mother was already working to ensure that balance would never be possible. The interference started subtly. Comments here and there about James that seemed innocent on the surface, but planted seeds of doubt. She would mention that he seemed distant at family dinners, even when I thought he had been perfectly engaged. She would suggest that his career in tech meant he probably worked with lots of attractive women, letting the implication hang in the air. She would remind me that my father had seemed like a wonderful man too, before he revealed his true colors. I dismissed these comments at first. I knew my mother was projecting her own experiences onto my relationship. I told myself she would come around once she saw how committed James was, once she understood that not every man was like my father. I kept trying to bridge the gap between them, to create a harmonious family dynamic that would make everyone happy. What I did not realize was that my mother did not want harmony. She wanted dominance. The first major incident happened about a year into our serious relationship. James and I were planning a weekend trip to Vancouver for our anniversary, something we had been looking forward to for months. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, my mother called me in tears, claiming she had fallen and injured her back. She said she could barely walk, that she was terrified of being alone, that she needed me to come stay with her. I was torn, but ultimately I felt I had no choice. I canceled the trip, apologized profusely to James, and spent the weekend at my mother's house. She seemed to recover remarkably quickly once I was there, moving around with surprising ease by the second day. When I mentioned this, she became defensive and accused me of not caring about her well-being. I apologized again, because that was what I had been trained to do. James was understanding about the canceled trip, but I could see something in his eyes that worried me. Not anger exactly, but a kind of resignation. He was beginning to recognize a pattern that I was still too enmeshed to see clearly. Over the next year, there were more incidents, more emergencies that required my immediate attention, more canceled plans and missed events. My mother had a gift for timing her crises to coincide with moments that mattered in my relationship with James. His birthday dinner was interrupted by a panic attack she claimed required my presence. Our planned engagement party was canceled when she was hospitalized for chest pains that turned out to be heartburn. Every step forward we tried to take was met with some obstacle that originated from my mother, but the real damage was happening in smaller, more insidious ways. When James was not around, my mother would fill my ears with subtle poison. She would point out every small thing he did wrong and interpret it in the worst possible light. She would remind me constantly of my father's abandonment, drawing parallels that did not actually exist, but felt emotionally resonant. She would suggest that James was only with me for superficial reasons, that he would eventually get bored, that I was setting myself up for the same heartbreak she had experienced. Slowly, without realizing it, I started to internalize her doubts. I started looking for evidence of the problems she kept warning me about. I started pulling away from James emotionally, creating distance as a form of self-protection against an abandonment that was not actually coming. I started fights about nothing, testing him, pushing him, trying to confirm the narrative my mother had planted in my head. James tried to talk to me about what was happening. He recognized that something had changed, that I was not the same open and trusting person he had fallen in love with. He asked if something was wrong, if I was having second thoughts, if there was anything he could do. But I could not articulate what was happening because I did not fully understand it myself. I just felt anxious all the time, suspicious of his motives, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Looking back now, I can see exactly what my mother was doing. She was isolating me from the person who made me happy, eroding my confidence in the relationship, and positioning herself as the only reliable source of love and support in my life. It was textbook manipulation, but when you are living inside it, when the manipulator is your own mother, it is almost impossible to recognize. The breaking point came during what should have been one of the happiest moments of my life. James proposed to me on a Saturday evening in October, on the rooftop of the restaurant where we had our first date. It was perfect and romantic, and everything I had secretly hoped for. I said yes through tears of joy, and for about 12 hours, I felt genuinely, uncomplicatedly happy. Then I told my mother. Her reaction was not what any daughter would hope for. There were no congratulations, no excitement, No questions about the ring or the proposal or our plans. Instead, her face went pale and her lips pressed into a thin line. She asked me if I was sure, really sure, if I had thought this through properly. She reminded me that she had married young too, and look how that had turned out. She suggested that maybe I should take more time, really get to know James before making such a permanent commitment. I defended my choice, defended James, tried to share my happiness with her despite her obvious disapproval. But she was not interested in my happiness. She was interested in control, and she was losing it. Over the following weeks, my mother's behavior escalated dramatically. She stopped being subtle about her opposition to the engagement. She openly criticized James at family gatherings, making dinner conversations uncomfortable and tense. She started calling me multiple times a day with urgent warnings about red flags she claimed to have noticed. She demanded that I sign a prenuptial agreement so detailed and aggressive that James's family was deeply offended when they heard about it. The stress was unbearable. I felt like I was being pulled in two directions by two people who both claimed to love me. James was growing frustrated, not with me, but with the situation. He started asking hard questions about why my mother seemed to hate him so much, why I was allowing her behavior to affect our relationship, why I seemed unable to set boundaries. Those questions made me defensive. I made excuses for my mother. I told James he did not understand our dynamic. I suggested that maybe he needed to try harder to win her over. I put the burden of fixing the problem on him, instead of addressing the real source of the conflict. The engagement lasted 4 months before James finally reached his breaking point. He came to me one evening looking exhausted and heartbroken. He said that he loved me more than he had ever loved anyone, but he could not marry into a situation where he would always be fighting my mother for my attention and loyalty. He said that he had tried to be patient, tried to give me space to work things out, but he could not watch our relationship be slowly poisoned anymore. He said that until I was ready to prioritize us over her demands, he did not see a future where we could be happy together. I was devastated, but also angry. I felt like he was giving me an ultimatum, forcing me to choose between him and my mother. I told him that was not fair. He told me that what was not fair was being with someone whose mother treated him like an enemy and whose girlfriend would not protect him. We argued. We cried. And then he left. For weeks after the breakup, I was a shell of myself. I went through the motions at work, cried myself to sleep every night, replayed every moment of our relationship trying to figure out what I had done wrong. My mother was there through all of it, offering comfort and support, telling me that it was better this way, that I would find someone more suitable, that James had proven he was not committed enough by walking away. I believed her. I believed that James had abandoned me, just like my father had abandoned her. I believed that the problem was with him, not with us, not with her. I let her narrative become my truth because the alternative was too painful to consider. The alternative was that my mother had deliberately destroyed the most important relationship of my life, and I was not ready to face that yet. It was my Aunt Patty who finally opened my eyes. Patty is my mother's older sister, and they have been estranged for years because of conflicts I never fully understood. My mother always described Patty as jealous and bitter, someone who could not stand to see her sister happy. I had absorbed this characterization without questioning it, keeping my distance from Patty as my mother preferred. But after the breakup, Patty reached out to me. She had heard through family channels about what had happened with James, and she wanted to talk. I almost deleted her message without responding, but something made me pause. Some small voice in the back of my mind wondered if maybe there was more to the story than my mother had told me. We met for coffee at a neutral location, and Patty told me things that changed everything I thought I knew about my mother. She told me that my mother had done this before. Years ago, when I was too young to remember, my mother had systematically sabotaged Patty's relationship with a man she loved. She had spread rumors, manufactured conflicts, played on insecurities until the relationship collapsed. The pattern was identical to what she had done with James, right down to the timing of crises and the steady drip of poisonous commentary. Patty told me that this was why they were estranged. She had confronted my mother about the sabotage, and my mother had denied everything, then cut Patty out of her life completely. Patty had watched from a distance over the years, hoping my mother would change, but seeing the same controlling patterns play out in how she raised me. She had wanted to intervene, but feared that contacting me would only make things worse while my mother still had such a strong hold on me. I sat there listening to Patty's story and felt my entire understanding of reality shift beneath me. Every incident with James suddenly looked different. Every emergency, every criticism, every carefully planted doubt. I could see now what I had been too close to see before. My mother had not been protecting me. She had been isolating me, ensuring that I would never have anyone in my life more important than her. The realization was devastating, but also clarifying. For the first time, I was not confused about what had happened. I was not blaming myself or James. I knew exactly who was responsible and exactly what they had done. When I confronted my mother, I expected denial. What I got was worse. She did not deny what she had done. She justified it. She told me that she had been protecting me from making the same mistakes she had made. She said that James would have left me eventually anyway, that all men leave, that she was the only one who would never abandon me. She seemed genuinely confused about why I was upset, as if her manipulation had been a gift rather than a violation. I told her that what she had done was not protection. It was control. It was sabotage. It was a betrayal so profound that I was not sure our relationship could recover from it. She became angry then, accusing me of being ungrateful, of choosing a man over my own mother, of not understanding how much she had sacrificed for me. The conversation spiraled into exactly the kind of toxic dynamic she had created, with her playing the victim and me feeling guilty for my legitimate anger. I left her house that day, knowing that something fundamental had to change. I could not continue this relationship as it was. I could not continue being manipulated and controlled by someone who saw my happiness as a threat to her own security. But I also did not know how to walk away from my own mother. The first step was therapy. I found a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and controlling relationships, and I started unpacking 28 years of conditioning. I learned about enmeshment and narcissistic parenting, and the ways that childhood programming can persist into adulthood. I learned to recognize manipulation tactics and to trust my own perceptions instead of constantly second-guessing myself. Most importantly, I learned that setting boundaries with a parent is not betrayal. It is self-preservation. The second step was reaching out to James. I had no expectation that he would want to hear from me. Months had passed since the breakup, and I had heard through mutual friends that he was doing well, moving on, healing from the damage our relationship had caused him. But I needed him to know the truth. I needed him to understand that what had happened was not his fault, and was not really my fault either. It was the result of manipulation by someone who should have been in our corner. I wrote him a long letter explaining everything I had learned. I told him about my aunt's revelations, about my mother's history of sabotage, about the therapy I was doing to untangle myself from her control. I apologized for not seeing what was happening sooner, for not protecting our relationship, for letting him bear the burden of a problem I should have addressed. I told him that I understood if he never wanted to speak to me again, but I could not let him continue thinking that our love had failed on its own terms. It had been murdered, deliberately and methodically, by someone who could not tolerate my happiness. I did not expect a response. But James called me 2 days later, and we talked for 3 hours. He told me that after the breakup, he had started putting pieces together on his own. He had noticed the pattern of my mother's crises, the timing of her interventions, the way my confidence in our relationship seemed to erode whenever I spent significant time with her. He had suspected manipulation, but had not been able to prove it, and he had been afraid that accusing my mother would only drive me further away. He told me that he was glad I had finally seen the truth, not for his sake, but for mine. He said that he had never stopped loving me, but that love had not been enough to overcome the forces working against us. He did not know if we could rebuild what we had lost, but he was willing to try if I was genuinely committed to breaking free from my mother's control. It was the most honest and painful conversation of my life. We were not getting back together that night, or even that month. There was too much damage to repair, and too much work I still needed to do on myself. But for the first time since the breakup, I felt hope. Real hope, not the manufactured optimism my mother fed me to keep me compliant. The hardest part came next, establishing boundaries with my mother. I did not cut her off immediately. That felt too sudden, too absolute, and despite everything she had done, I still loved her in the complicated way you love people who have hurt you. Instead, I set firm limits on our interactions. No more daily phone calls. No more dropping everything for her emergencies. No more listening to criticism of James or anyone else I chose to have in my life. I told her that if she wanted a relationship with me, she would need to respect my autonomy and support my decisions even when she disagreed with them. She did not react well. There were accusations and guilt trips and dramatic claims that I was abandoning her just like everyone else had. She tried every manipulation tactic in her arsenal, and when none of them worked, she escalated to threats. She told family members that I was having a breakdown, that James had brainwashed me, that she was a victim of my cruelty. She tried to turn people against me the same way she had tried to turn me against James. But something had changed. I could see her clearly now. Every manipulation attempt was obvious to me in a way it never had been before. I did not feel guilty or confused or responsible for her emotional state. I felt sad because I was watching my mother reveal who she truly was, and who she truly was could not accept me as an independent person. But I did not feel controlled. Some family members sided with her. Others, including Aunt Patty and a few cousins who had their own experiences with my mother's behavior, supported me. I lost relationships with people who bought into my mother's victim narrative, and I made peace with those losses. The cost of telling the truth was high, but the cost of living under her control had been higher. James and I rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with the help of couples counseling and a mutual commitment to honest communication. We both had work to do. He needed to heal from feeling powerless against my mother's interference. I needed to learn new patterns of relating that were not shaped by manipulation and guilt. We did not get engaged again right away. We dated, we talked, we rebuilt trust one conversation at a time. It took almost 2 years for us to get back to where we had been before my mother's sabotage. But in some ways, we ended up somewhere better. Our relationship now was based on clear communication and mutual respect, instead of my unconscious enmeshment with my mother. We knew how to protect our bond from outside interference. We knew what we were fighting for and what we were fighting against. When James proposed to me the second time, in the living room of the apartment we now shared, with no audience and no elaborate setup, just his honest words and hopeful eyes, I said yes with a certainty I had never felt before. This time, I was choosing him freely, without the weight of my mother's manipulation distorting my perspective. We got married in a small ceremony 6 months later. My mother was not invited. That was my boundary, and it was not an easy one to maintain. People questioned it. Some family members pressured me to reconcile, to be the bigger person, to forgive and forget. But I had learned that forgiveness does not require reconciliation, and that protecting my happiness is not the same as seeking revenge. I was not punishing my mother by excluding her from my wedding. I was simply refusing to give her another opportunity to damage something I had fought so hard to rebuild. She found out about the wedding from relatives who attended. She sent me a letter afterward, full of hurt and accusation, demanding to know how I could have denied her the experience of seeing her only daughter get married. I read the letter and felt the old familiar pull of guilt, the programming trying to reassert itself. But then I looked at my husband, at the life we had built together despite everything, and I put the letter away without responding. Some people might say that I was cruel to my mother. Some people might say that what she did was wrong, but that she is still my mother and deserves forgiveness. I understand those perspectives, but I do not share them. My mother did not make a mistake. She did not lose control or act in a moment of poor judgment. She systematically and deliberately sabotaged my relationship over the course of years because she could not tolerate me having love that was not dependent on her. That is not a mistake. That is a pattern of behavior that revealed her true character. The consequences she faced were not something I orchestrated. I did not expose her or humiliate her or seek any form of active revenge. I simply stopped protecting her from the natural consequences of her actions. When family members asked why I was distant, I told them the truth. When she tried to manipulate me, I refused to participate. When she positioned herself as a victim, I did not validate her narrative. The consequence of her behavior was losing her daughter's trust and presence in her life. That consequence was not my revenge. It was the natural result of her choices. These days, we have limited contact. A few times a year, I will meet her for coffee or a brief lunch. The conversations are surface level and carefully boundaried. She has not changed. She still makes comments that I recognize as manipulation attempts, still tries to guilt me about the distance between us, still presents herself as the victim of my unfair treatment. But the difference is that I see it now. I recognize it instantly and refuse to engage with it. I do not hate my mother. Hate would require too much energy and would give her too much power over my emotional state. What I feel is a kind of resigned sadness. She had a chance to have a real relationship with her daughter, one based on mutual respect and genuine connection, and she threw it away because she could not let go of control. That is her loss, not mine. James and I have been married for 3 years now. We have a daughter of our own, a beautiful little girl named Lily, who I am determined to raise differently than I was raised. I will love her enough to let her go. I will celebrate her independence instead of trying to control it. I will support her relationships instead of sabotaging them. I will be the mother mine never figured out how to be. My mother has met Lily twice, both times under careful supervision and for brief periods. She has tried to establish a closer relationship, positioning herself as the doting grandmother. But I am not ready to trust her with my daughter's emotional well-being. Maybe I never will be. That is a bridge I will cross if and when she demonstrates genuine change, something she has shown no signs of pursuing. When I think about what my mother took from me, the years of my life I spent doubting myself, the relationship she nearly destroyed, the confidence she eroded through constant manipulation, I sometimes feel angry. But more often, I feel grateful. Grateful that I eventually saw the truth. Grateful that James was patient enough to wait for me. Grateful that I broke the cycle of control before passing it on to another generation. The truth about my mother was not something I wanted to discover. It was painful and disillusioning, and forced me to re-examine my entire childhood through a new lens. But truth is always better than comfortable lies. The truth set me free in ways that continued denial never could have. If you are watching this and recognizing something in my story, if you have a parent or family member who sabotages your relationships, who cannot tolerate your independence, who uses guilt and manipulation to maintain control, I want you to know something important. Their behavior is not your fault. Their inability to love you in a healthy way is not a reflection of your worthiness. And setting boundaries with them, even if it means losing the relationship, is not betrayal. It is survival. I tried to save my relationship with James while also maintaining my relationship with my mother. For a long time, I thought that was possible. I thought I could love both of them fully and find some balance that worked for everyone. But my mother did not want balance. She wanted dominance. And as long as she held that position, there was no room in my life for love that did not flow through her. The relationship I saved in the end was not the one I expected. It was not my relationship with my mother, which may never fully recover. It was my relationship with myself. I learned to trust my own perceptions, to validate my own feelings, to make choices based on my own values instead of her programming. I became a person who could love freely, without the constant undercurrent of guilt and fear that had shaped my entire life. My mother destroyed my relationship with James the first time. I will always grieve the years we lost, the pain we both experienced, the damage that took so long to repair. But she did not destroy me. She did not destroy us. In the end, her manipulation revealed her true character and gave me the information I needed to finally break free. That is not the revenge I would have chosen if I were writing a story. There is no dramatic confrontation, no public humiliation, no moment where she fully recognizes and regrets what she did. The ending is quieter than that. It is just a woman living her life on her own terms, married to a man who loves her, raising a daughter in a healthier way, and maintaining whatever relationship is possible with a mother who cannot change. But maybe that is the best revenge of all. Not dramatic justice delivered from outside, but the simple, profound experience of being free. Free from control. Free from manipulation. Free from the exhausting performance of managing someone else's emotional demands at the expense of my own well-being. I am Megan. I tried to save my relationship while my mother was systematically destroying it. I lost the first battle, but won the war. And if you are fighting a similar battle, I hope my story gives you permission to stop trying to please people who do not want to be pleased. You deserve a love that is not constantly under attack. You deserve a life that is not dominated by someone else's need for control. You deserve to be free.